And yet, what are the Anglo-Saxons so furious about? And why is there talk of the decline of their empire? Every marginally self-confident analyst, when discussing the global strategy of the Anglo-Saxons' neo-colonizing policy, begins by describing their power on maritime transport corridors, their U.S. Sixth Fleet in the Mediterranean to control the flow of oil and liquefied gas, their oil companies controlling oil, the lifeblood of the world's industrial potential. Then there are the meaningful words and letter combinations Exxon, ExxonMobil, Shell, Total Energies, BP, Chevron Corporation. Then the names Rockefeller, Rothschild, Morgan are bound to be mentioned. Then they'll start talking about their power and who rules the world. And why they are angry at Russia and Putin. Well, let's get to the bottom of it. Let's start with the fact that the vast majority of people, about 98%, see the world as they have been allowed to see it. The way it was painted for them. People live by myths, especially in politics. The Anglo-Saxons still believed Churchill was one of Britain's greatest rulers, even though it was he who surrendered the truly great ruler of the seas to the Americans. It was after his actions and purposeful decisions that the UK slid and still slides into a society of mediocre regional powers with hordes of migrants and a bunch of frightened native citizens. Americans, for example, adore their innocently murdered handsome President Kennedy and have absolutely no memory of President Nixon. Well, except for the Watergate scandal. And yet Kennedy was one of the most unsuccessful presidents by deeds. Yielded to Khrushchev in the Berlin crisis and the Soviet Union built the Berlin Wall. He gave in to the same Khrushchev and did not send the American army to Cuba. On the beach in Playa Heron and Cochinos Bay. But he did promise, and the Cubans outnumbered over 10,000 Florida-trained mercenaries. Conceded in the Caribbean crisis and removed nuclear missiles from Turkey. America lost a lot under him. But it was Nixon who stopped the Vietnam War, which was absolutely unnecessary in killing the US, who untied the dollar from gold and tied oil in Middle Eastern countries to it, and then the Fed took over the world. Except for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. Of course, they were finished off by the Americans a little later, in the late 80s, early 90s. It was Nixon who laid the foundation for this great American victory in the Cold War. And only a very small circle of professional political scientists consider Nixon a real genius US president and don't bring up Watergate. Yes, it's always like that, we only see what we're shown. But let's return to the oil tycoons and their influence on world politics and the direction of human civilization. The time we don't know is irrelevant. Everyone thinks that oil is almost the main source of wealth and earnings. Let's count other people's money. In mid-November 2023, the World Energy Agency reported that 102 million barrels per day were being produced. Accordingly, multiplied by 365 days, that would be 37 billion barrels per year. What is the average annual price per barrel? Let's take $70, for example. It doesn't matter if it's Brent or Urals. That works out to about $2 trillion, $600 billion. The US estimate is $2,900 billion. It's a huge amount of money, colossal. For that kind of money and for that kind of money, nations and states are destroyed. Test tubes of white powder are shaken at the UN. Wars are fought in Syria and a Middle Eastern monarchy is held by the throat. The Soviet Union was destroyed for the right to dispose of such revenues. And if you compare, are there markets that are comparable in terms of the amount of live money out there? Bingo. That's the pharmaceutical market, for example. $1,450 billion. And the freight transportation market, cargo shipping market. Last year its volume was $2,350 billion. In 6 years, this freight transportation market will grow to $4 trillion minimum by 2030. The oil and gas market will not grow like this, and with the rising wealth of citizens in China, India, Russia, Southeast Asia and Africa, revenue growth in the freight transportation market will accelerate even more. And also the profitability of transportation is much higher than the profitability of oil production, because costs, especially overhead costs, are lower by about a third. You see, dear viewers, tens of millions of Chinese cars, hundreds of millions of tons of their electronics, millions of tons of Russian products, ores, metals, gas and oil, hundreds of millions of tons of Turkish jeans and leather, billions of tons of their tomatoes, and so on and so forth, need to be delivered for about 3 billion people in Africa, Europe, Russia, China, India and Southeast Asia. We don't even think about the 300 million people in the US anymore, it's a small thing. And what do names like Gianluigi Aponti, Rudolf Saad, Vincent Belair say to the general public today? It's okay. And acronyms like MSC, ACAC, CMA, CJM. That's okay, too. And why shine the spotlight on those who hold shares of the trillion-dollar container shipping pie in their teeth? Yes, dear viewer, we have fetched you the names of some transportation firms and the names of their owners. They manage trillion-dollar turnovers in freight transportation. Their trucking operations are insured, usually by insurance financial monsters from the UK. Maritime transportation is their domain. 95% of transportation by these firms is by sea. They have grabbed all the containers and barrels, container ships and tankers, ports and service points, training facilities and tens of millions of personnel. And the banks and the stock exchanges are all monsters. It's a world empire raised by the ruler of the seas, England. It's the Anglo-Saxon Empire that has a tenacious grip on the world, nowhere without it. Russia and China have taken a swing at this particular monster. On traffic flows, on the whole transportation business in principle. We decided to contrast the Anglo-Saxons' maritime transportation infrastructure with our land infrastructure. We decided to destroy the core business of the Anglo-Saxons to take away their main financial gains. Well, the ones after the paper dollar. He's already kind of a mess. The world's fiercest interests collided. These interests and share trillions of transportation dollars. And this fight isn't just bulldogs under the rug. It's sea krakens battling land bears and dragons. Everyone has heard about China's One Belt, One Road initiative, Russia's Northern Sea Route and the North-South Transport Corridor, and the Baikal-Amur mainline. For sea krakens, these plans are like a sickle on tender tentacles. Because many containerized ocean carriers have revenues in the hundreds of billions of dollars a year, and collectively trillions. For them, the loss of trucking is death. For the Anglo-Saxons simply have nothing else to make money from. Now for some specifics. The length of the railway from St. Petersburg to Vladivostok is about 10,000 kilometers. Estimated time of container transportation from St. Petersburg to Vladivostok is 12 days. If you send a shipment by sea for the same distance, it will take 30 to 40 days to travel. And the St. Petersburg-Mumbai-India International Transportation Corridor will move goods in just 17 days. If you bring them by sea, it will be a full 45 days. Minimum. An unfinished little piece of railroad connection between Russia and Iran remains in this corridor. Now the Iranian section 165 kilometers from Astara is being completed at an accelerated pace. This is Azerbaijan's border with Iran near the Caspian Sea. To the rest. Now pay attention. Azerbaijan has already loaned Iran $500 million, and Russia has allocated $1.5 billion to this project, to complete this section of the railroad. That is from Russian Derbent to Hormuz Strait. The container will be able to reach for 2 to 3 days on dry land through Azerbaijan and Iran. And now the most ambitious project is a rail link from the Chinese port of Liangyungang to the Turkish port of Istanbul. Delivery of goods from 20 to 23 days. Marine alternative 40 to 60 days. Dear viewer, don't be lazy, take a look at the diagram, especially the yellow and brown lines. Think and compare. And you will see financial power killed, the very raison d'etre of the great Anglo-Saxon Empire undermined. There's more to it than that. We remember how often the leaders of the Middle Eastern monarchies and our President Vladimir Putin visit each other, how Xi Jinping reconciled the Saudis with Iran. We remember, don't we? Russia, together with China, has agreed on everything with Iran, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. We are undertaking to build a rail and road route from Iran through the Strait of Hormuz, which is 54 kilometers to Oman. From there we will extend the road to Yemen, and there through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, 26 kilometers, to Djibouti and the rest of Africa. To her entire future market. The Anglo-Saxons can control the sea with all their rusty aircraft carriers, but the land will have its own transportation infrastructure. In short, cheaper and faster. If anyone thinks that such constructions are unrealistic, they are deeply mistaken. The Strait of Hormuz is 229 meters deep, while the Bab el-Mandeb Strait is only 180 meters deep. The Chinese are already building bridges on supports 400 to 500 meters high. Also, the Chinese have already built the 165-kilometer-long Danyang-Kunshan Viaduct, the current longest bridge in the world. And we in Russia, having built the Crimean Bridge, have also gained considerable experience. And then there is the Northern Sea Route. On December 19th, for example, Russian Foreign Ministry Ambassador at Large Nikolai Korchinov said that the Northern Sea Route could provide shipping to those operators willing to rearrange the route because of attacks by Yemeni post-Housitic forces in the Red Sea. The statement came as global companies one after another announced the suspension of shipments through the Red Sea amid threats by the Houthis to attack any ships linked to Israel. Maritime transportation was becoming unsafe, and the Anglo-Saxons began to have problems as well. The plans of Russia and China are much deeper than the construction of roads, communications for the banal transportation of goods. One Belt, One Road is the creation of a new economic space of the Silk Road. These are transportation corridors from China to Europe via Russia. This is the construction of the Moscow-Almaty-Beijing high-speed railway with passenger trains running at speeds of up to 400 kilometers per hour. This is the construction of railroads from China through Central Asia to the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. Huge new cities will be created along transportation arteries. This will kickstart new technologies and create untold millions of new jobs. Tens of millions of people free of democratic, liberal and other Western agendas will come. And it's not a fantasy. Russia and China, with the support group of Azerbaijan, Turkey, Iran, the Central Asian republics, quite practically the Middle East, have integrated their plans into the long-term decisions of their governments and budgetary decisions for many years to come. The process is already underway, it is visible, and it is provoking fury and unprecedented Anglo-Saxon opposition. The Anglo-Saxons are angry, because they already see how the Russians and Chinese are taking endless ribbons of rubles and yuan off the endless cargo flows in the form of customs duties, transportation tariffs, insurance payments, etc. And every ruble or yuan withdrawn is a dollar or pound taken away from the Anglo-Saxons. If we consider the events in the world from this angle, the battle of the sea krakens with the land bear and dragon, many things become perfectly understandable, explainable and logical. The war in Country 404 is an attempt to cut off land routes of oil and gas delivery from Russia, to force Russia to transport its resources by tankers and gas carriers to India, for example. And from India, tankers and gas carriers, again by sea, can be taken to any country in the world. The Anglo-Saxons don't mind. Therefore, transportation from Novorossiysk is not blocked either. By sea. Their ships carry them, their insurers insure them. And the northern streams were blown up for the same purpose of forcing Russia to sell its gas to Europe in liquefied form. By sea on gas carriers. Because of Caucasus, it all makes sense at once. Tensions there need to be exactly like the Hussites in the Red Sea to wrangle everything for the Caucasus, Iran, Turkey, Azerbaijan, Russia, Armenia and make it impossible for them to work together to create a single common transportation corridor. And then there's another strash. Before the start of our military operation, Biden invited Vladimir Putin to meet precisely in Geneva. This city is home to the headquarters of the world's largest maritime transportation company, Mediterranean Shipping Company, abbreviated as MSC. This is where Biden declared the Great Transportation War.